It's a pleasure to have Dr. Narendranath Patra as the speaker today in our seminar. Um, Dr. Patra did his PhD in NCRA, working on neutral hydrogen studies of neutral hydrogen in dwarf galaxies. Then, after his PhD, he stayed on as a postdoc at NCRA, uh, working on the baseline configurations of the upgraded GMRT. And then he came to RRI, as he's now, for the last 3 years, he has been at RRI as the Pancharatnam postdoctoral fellow. And he has continued his work on H1 studies of inferring aspects of galaxy evolution and formation. But he's also explored, he has been also been exploring other topics like ISM, interstellar medium, and for example, inferring the dark matter distribution profiles from these studies, H1 and molecular studies. So he's going to talk today about observations of nearby galaxies and how we can probe galaxy formation and evolution. These observations. Narendra.
Okay. Thank you, Biman, for this kind introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. So I'll be talking about probing galaxy formation and evolution using observations of nearby galaxies. So this is the brief, outline of the topics which I plan to cover in this talk. I'll touch upon, and this is basically related to galaxy formation and evolution. What are the key factors in galaxy formation and evolution? So the first is that the gas and star formation in galaxies. So this is a very crucial aspect, which basically tells you how the galaxies will convert their gas into stars, right? Then another important aspect is dark matter distribution in galaxies. And this is basically another crucial aspect which significantly influence the galaxy formation and evolution. We will discuss some of them in this talk. And the third topic is the vertical structure of the baryonic disk. So this is very often is neglected, but this actually provides a very crucial observational kind of indicator which is required to study galaxy evolution and formation processes. Okay, so to study all these, all these aspects of galaxy formation and evolution, we need to build a comprehensive sample of galaxies, right? On which we would actually study all these several aspects. So to do that, as part of my thesis work, I have conducted an H1 survey of nearby dwarf irregular galaxies. So the name of the survey is the Faint Irregular Galaxies GMRT Survey 2, that is FIGS 2, right? So as part of this survey, I have observed like 20 galaxies with the GMRT in H1 and detected 15 of them. So the FIGS and FIGS 2 together consist of like around 100 galaxies, and this is the largest sample of dwarf galaxies till date, right? So this extensive data set can be used to study several scientific problems, as I just presented in the last slide. So what we have done with this data, with this FIGS and FIGS 2 data, first is to ask that worked on this H1 column density distribution function. So in this study, what we have asked is that we have this dwarf galaxy in the local volume. Can they serve as a representative population of high redshift absorbers? Okay. So say for example, if you take a galaxy, right, and if you observe it, from nearby, if it is nearby, then you can observe this galaxy using a radio telescope, specifically the gas content of this galaxy, right? But if this galaxy is at far away, right, say for example beyond redshift 0.1, then the emission coming from the gas content of this galaxy is so faint, you will not be able to detect it directly, right? So it is a problem of directly detecting these galaxies if they are like far in the distance, right? So most of the study because of this reason is confined to the absorption studies. In absorption, detecting these galaxies in absorption is not a problem. You can detect them in from the very high redshift as well, right? So, but the problem with the absorption studies is that you do not know, the particular nature, because the absorption is always a line of sight problem, right? So you get information along that line of sight. You don't have any detailed, distributed information, right? So many, for a long time, people have been debating like what is the nature of these absorption systems, like absorbing system, which are like at a high redshift, right, at a large distance. So one proposition is this, that local volume dwarf galaxies could be the high redshift absorbers, right? And there are several reasons why to suspect that. In the hierarchical structure formation model, the small galaxies form first and then they collapse together to form larger galaxies, right? So in that sense, if you go back in time, you would expect that there will be more number of smaller galaxies like dwarf galaxies as compared to large galaxies, right? That is one. The second thing is that the metallicity along the absorption line of sight found is actually consistent with the metallicity found in dwarf galaxies. So that is another kind of indicator that these systems could be the representative systems at high redshift. So in particular, what we have studied is that, okay, fine, if this proposition true or false, we want to investigate. So we have taken the local volume dwarf galaxies and placed these galaxies at high redshift and asked this particular question, that the average number of absorbers per unit volume, okay, if these dwarf galaxies are being able to produce or not, and what is observed with that at high redshift. So the question we asked, if we place these dwarf galaxies at high redshift, are they being able to produce the average number of absorbers per unit volume as observed or not? The answer is no, they can't. So here in this plot, this red squares basically indicates the average number of absorbers per unit volume as found from the dwarf galaxies, and these blue triangles are basically the observation from high redshift absorption studies, right? So at DLA column densities, approximately 10% of the H1 cross section is being contributed by dwarfs. Okay, they cannot produce more than that. So at high redshift, we need high column density, big galaxies to explain the data. So the dwarfs alone cannot represent the high redshift absorbers. Okay, so then we move to another aspect with this data set, that is gas and star formation in dwarf galaxies.
Sorry, just one second, Biman.
Yeah, yeah.
What is the policy for the questions? Is it along as we go along, or?
If it is a brief question, yes, please go ahead. Is it okay, Naren?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to see, you started with the thing that you started with the under the assumption that small galaxies are more likely to form than a large galaxy,
right,
and then they will coalesce into forming larger structures. But
right,
collapse is a very nonlinear thing. So the
right,
larger the volume, the higher the chance of collapse.
correct.
So why did you make this other assumption that you will first make smaller galaxies and these smaller galaxies will then coalesce into a larger galaxy? What is the root behind that assumption?
Okay, so this basically comes from the fact that at high redshift, when the universe, what is the evolutionary process of the universe, so there you would form the smaller galaxies first. And then they collapse. Yes, it is a nonlinear process, but this nonlinear process to take over, you need significant amount of time. And as the time goes, it means you are coming closer to lower redshifts, right? But these absorption systems are sitting at higher redshifts. Correct?
Well, see, the thing is that the bigger the system, the smaller the bigger the mass, the faster the collapse, actually, because that's the nonlinearity then will work in favor of a fast collapse for a bigger mass distribution than for a more limited amount of mass over the same volume.
Right, but to form these bigger structures, you need more time, right? You don't get these bigger structures readily available right at the beginning. Say, for example, if I'm talking about redshift 7 to 10, if you count, so from the numerical simulation, the number of large structures would be much rare as compared to at redshift, for example, 0.1 or 0.2, right? I agree. If you have large galaxies, the probability of collapse or having large galaxies is more. But to form these large structures, to start or to begin with, you need sufficient amount of time, and sufficient mergers have to happen to form these large galaxies. So that is why if I am talking about like these absorption systems which are at high redshift, like redshift the 6, 7, and beyond 5, 6, 7. So there you would not expect as many large structures to form to begin with, right? So that is why people thought that, okay, the small systems will be much more in number, and the chances that a line of sight will cross this small system is more.
Okay, fine. Let's carry on. We can come back to this later. Fine. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so then we investigated the gas and star formation in dwarf galaxies. So molecular gas in particular is a precursor to star formation. The stars form out of molecular beds, right? So the molecular gas traces the star formation, immediate star formation. But the problem with dwarf galaxies is that despite large efforts, you don't detect much of the molecular gas in these systems. Okay, so if we don't detect molecular gas in this system, so we cannot study the connection between molecular gas and the star formation. So alternatively, what we can do is that we can study, or we can detect the cold H1, the cold neutral hydrogen phase, which is the immediate precursor to the molecular gas. And we ask this question, that if the cold neutral gas can be treated as a precursor to star formation in dwarf galaxies, as we do not detect molecular gas in them, right? And the answer is no. So what we have found is that we detected cold H1 in dwarf galaxies using our FIGS and FIGS2 data, and we then investigate its connection to star formation. And what we have found is that this cold H1 do not correlate with star formation as good as with the total neutral gas, which is quite counterintuitive, right? I mean, if the gas is cold, then you would expect that it will form molecular gas and immediately it will form stars. So it's supposed to correlate more with the star formation, but here we don't see that. So what could be the reason? So the reason being that this cold phase probably is a transient phase. Okay, so it means whatever the cold H1 I am seeing right now, they do not have immediate correlation with star formation, right? So the recent star formation, whatever I'm seeing, they might not be directly correlated to the cold H1 what we detect in the dwarf galaxies. So this kind of tells us that, okay, we should not focus more on cold H1 when we are trying to infer the star formation in these dwarf galaxies, right? Okay, so so then I will shift the gear a bit, and I will discuss work related to dark matter in galaxies. Okay, so in particular, I'll talk about the missing satellite problem. Okay, so the lambda CDM model of cosmology is the most successful cosmological model, okay, till now, and it has been able to explain the observation at large scales, but there are several inconsistencies persist between its prediction and observations, specifically at small scales like galactic scale, right? And the missing satellite problem is actually one of the serious one, right? So what is this missing satellite problem? So the number of predicted subhalos, around a big galaxy, large galaxy like our own Milky Way, is order of magnitude higher than what is observed. So say, for example, if you take a large galaxy like Milky Way, okay, and around this large galaxy, you would expect few hundreds of satellite galaxies to be hanging around. So that is the lambda CDM model predicts, right? But when you go and observe, there are only tens, few tens of these small satellite galaxies you find, right? So this is basically the prediction of the lambda CDM model, and this is basically the observation, right? So there is a discrepancy, and this discrepancy is large. So what why we don't see them? Okay, so first of all, it could be like that the subhalos do not exist, and in that case lambda CDM will be in trouble, and there fine tuning might be required. And it could be that they are too faint to detect to be detected in conventional optical surveys, right? So it means that we do not understand the star formation recipes, and we do not know that how bright they should be, or we are expecting, right? So what is the remedy? Okay, what is the solution to this? So several numerical and deep observations have closed the gap. People have invoked many feedback processes, and other techniques to solve this discrepancy. And observation also, people have done deep observations, but still the gap remains, and it is it's a problem. Okay. So if we cannot detect these guys in conventional optical surveys, how about we go and look for the neutral hydrogen content in them, right? So we do not understand their star formation recipes. We are thinking that, okay, they should be this much of bright, but they are not that bright. So we can go and look into the atomic gas, right? So there is no bias. So people have done that. People have taken their telescopes, radio telescopes, and tried looking these objects. And guess what? They have found a lot of objects which are nice, round, and very much look like satellite galaxies, and they're like, all around. Okay. Are they all of them are satellite galaxies? No, they are not all of them. All of them are not satellite galaxies. They are compact high velocity clouds or ultra compact high velocity clouds, right? So these are H1 clouds which are originated from the Milky Way itself, right? For example, some supernova goes off, it actually throws up some amount of neutral gas from the system. There could be tidal interaction between galaxies, and which can take out some amount of neutral gas. So these clouds are actually hanging around, right? So the proposition is that though we are seeing, large amount of these clouds are hanging around, so the proposition is that a population of these objects could be cosmological mini halos or satellite galaxies. So now the problem is that how do we identify them, right? So if some of the satellite galaxies are kind of camouflaged as like compact and ultra compact high velocity clouds, how do I identify them, right? So these compact and ultra compact high velocity clouds would not be hosted by a dark matter halo, right? So if the cloud is originated from the galaxy, you don't expect that it will be hosted by a dark matter halo. On the other hand, for a satellite galaxy, because this has a cosmological origin, it will be hosted by a dark matter halo, right? And the compact morphology of this high velocity clouds shows that it has a prevailing hydrostatic equilibrium, and the hydrostatic structure of these two clouds will be different, because in one cloud you have dark matter which will produce a large amount of gravity, so it will change the structure, and on the other hand, in the other cloud you will not have the dark matter, so the hydrostatic structure would be different. So this is basically the criteria we are exploiting to identify mini halos from the pool of compact high velocity clouds, right? So these are the basic assumptions goes in the formalism. That is, the gas distribution is spherically symmetric. There is no rotation. That is, the system is fully thermally supported, which is actually supported by observation. There is negligible radiation pressure, and there is no it's not bounded by external pressure. It's not in a high density environment, right? So once you do that, one can write down the Poisson's equation of hydrostatic equilibrium in spherical symmetry, and you can simplify this equation. Further, I'm not going into the technical details of this, but we can solve this equation numerically and find out for a particular system whether it requires dark matter or not, or if we don't put dark matter halo in it, how the distribution of density of the gas should look like. Okay, so this is, we have applied to a simulated cloud. Okay, simulated cloud. So this red line, so the y-axis is basically the observed surface density profile, and the x-axis is the radius. Now, if you don't put dark matter halo in it, so you would expect the surface density profile should go like this red curve, right? But once you put a very small dark matter halo, for example, 2 × 10⁶ solar mass, right? There you would see the observed moment zero profile, that is the surface density profile, will basically changes, and this change is significant to be detected in observation, right? It's much beyond the observational uncertainty. So we apply this technique, this formalism, to a recently detected galaxy, satellite galaxy, Leo T, right? So this guy was thought to be a compact high velocity cloud at the beginning, but later people realized that it's not a cloud, it's a galaxy, it's a satellite galaxy. So the left hand side, you can see that this is basically the density distribution of the gas in the galaxy, and the middle panel is moment one, the velocity field of the galaxy. And as you can see, there is no ordered motion of in the moment one map, so it is not rotationally supported. It is just sitting there and thermally supported system, right? So we applied this formalism in this system, and this is what we found. So if we say that there is no dark matter in it, so then this red region is basically the surface density profile you would expect. Okay, but this blue line is basically the observation. So there is a huge discrepancy. It means that if we just say that this is a cloud and it does not have a dark matter, then it does not explain the observation, right? To explain the observation, you need to invoke that this has a dark matter halo, and it is a mini halo or it is a satellite galaxy. It's not a cloud, right? So what we can do, we can actually find out the nature of the dark matter halo. So we say that, okay, there is dark matter halo, but what kind of dark matter halo and what are its properties, right? What is the core density and what is the core radius of this dark matter halo? So to do that, we have assumed an isothermal dark matter halo, and with different, so isothermal dark matter halo has two properties, that is core density and scale radius, right? So what we do is that we simulate a large number of dark matter halos with different scale radius and core density, and we put these dark matter halos into the system, and every time we compute this solve equation and compute the surface density profile, and we find out which dark matter halo for which parameter it actually matches the observation best, right? So we explored this parameter space, and we have like 10,000, we have simulated 10,000 dark matter halos, and this is a quite compute intensive task, and it takes about few hours to compute for 1,000 cases with 400 processors in HPC. So we have implemented this whole formalism using MPI based parallel routine, right? Okay, so this is the result what we get, right? So the left hand side, this blue curve, this blue region basically shows you the surface density profile profiles of all these 10,000 dark matter halos, and this red one is basically the observation, right? And this is the best fit observation with the data. So we get a dark matter halo of mass something like 2.7 into 10 to the power 6, which is required to explain the observation of LEO T. Okay, so that is number one. So the next thing what we did is that we say, okay, I mean, there are observational uncertainties in this data, right? You have like error bar in this observation. So we say that any profile which actually matches the observation within the error bar, they are like equally good. Okay, let us see that what kind of dark matters actually sufficient enough or good enough to explain the data. So this is what we get. So this region, these dark matter halos are actually reasonably explain the data well within the error bar. Okay, and then I would like to request you to invest some time here in this second plot. So this is the parameter space of the dark matter halo. As I said, like it needs two parameters, that is RS, that is the scale radius, and rho 0, that is the core density. Okay, and this cross is basically our best fit model, which is this one, this one, rho is equal to 0.67 and RS is equal to 37%, this one. And this region, this hatched region, are the basically dark matter halos which actually explain the data within the error bars. Now, one thing to note is that even if you change that from RS from 50 to 150 like 3 times, and this direction also 3 to 4 times, these dark matter halos, they actually sits on a region where the color is almost the same, and the color represents the dark matter halo mass, right? So it means that all these dark matter halos have almost very similar mass, though their core density and scale radius are very different, 3 times here, 3 times this side. So it means that it is not the dark matter halo structure which actually dictates the kind of the hydrostatic structure, final structure. It is the mass which primarily set the hydrostatic structure of the system. So this has a cosmological implication. I will not go into details, but this kind of says that if you have a system which is like in hydrostatic equilibrium, and you are you are kind of investigating the structure of the hydrostatic structure in equilibrium, then from there it is very hard to conclude about their core radius and core density, scale radius and core density, because it is degenerate. Okay, and this has, the core density, the central core density has a connection with where this halo has been born, Means if it is like, born or like formed at much higher in redshift, so the core radius will be higher. Okay, so there are several people who actually infer the age of the halos using this kind of observation, but it is not right thing to do.
So can I
Yeah.
just ask a question?
Yes,
So the
yes.
thing is that how do you know that the galaxy is in hydrostatic equilibrium?
Yes. Okay. So there are like if you see this morphology, okay. So if it is not in hydrostatic equilibrium, so there will be a lot of kind of disturbed structure you would expect. That is number one. Then you don't only have the gas.
No, sorry, what are you showing? What are the three pictures exactly? What are we saying? This is the H1 density, integrated H1 density. M1 and M2 is what?
So M1 is basically the velocity field, means at every point, if you take a gas chunk, that what is the
Right.
velocity, I mean, radial, your radial
Fine.
velocity, and the moment 2 is basically the velocity dispersion. It is kind of a proxy for, temperature, you can say.
Right. So what about, how can you conclude from M1 and M2 that there is equilibrium? Because I mean, obviously the density of H1 is not consistent with, I mean, so the density has, let's say, some kind of a Gaussian distribution, but the velocity is not Gaussian.
Okay.
So how do you conclude that this is in hydrostatic equilibrium?
So basically, see here you see this is the beam. Okay, this is one resolution element, right? So within this region, I have many independent measurements. So this is not like one beam. So this is like resolved structure I see. Now, if this is not in hydrostatic equilibrium, so you would expect that there would be lot many gas which will be disturbed, and there, I mean, if it is disturbed.
No, I'm not talking about the density distribution. Let's forget about the H1. I'm talking about M1 and M2.
Correct.
The thing is that if you have a gas and it is in equilibrium, then I would expect that the local temperature at every point is similar. Okay, from what you're showing of M1 and M2 distributions, the local temperature, and basically this is the local velocity distribution does not seem to be the same, so that the local temperature distribution is not the same, which means that if the local temperature difference is not the same, then, and given that there is a density distribution, you will have currents and flow. Right. So, okay. So the temperature, what you are saying is that the temperature you expect in hydrostatic equilibrium same, it is actually, I mean, it's not entirely true. You might have a gradient in temperature. Okay, that is not a problem. And in fact, people have seen in systems which are really in equilibrium, they have a temperature gradient, and that comes about. There are a lot of complicated kind of exchange between radiation transport, and there will be okay, so obviously the answer is more complicated, but then when you see a structure, how do you decide that this is a structure in hydrostatic equilibrium? What would be, because everything that you have shown in this section afterwards is predicated on the fact that this is in hydrostatic equilibrium. Right.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, this is one of the assumptions, that if this is in hydrostatic equilibrium, but there are other, see, when you do observe a galaxy system, there are more than one observables, right? So in other systems also, if you say that, okay, this is not in hydrostatic equilibrium, the kind of predictions you make in terms of velocity field and in the what you call the density field, so they actually matches if you consider it to be hydrostatic equilibrium. And I will come to this point actually later part of this talk.
Okay, fine.
Okay. So I mean, the observations actually do support that, the gas in the galaxy will be in hydrostatic equilibrium, and that also, time scales are also quite large. I mean, if this is if you take like typical velocity field like 40 kilometers or 30 kilometers, you can easily calculate that if it is not in equilibrium, how long it will take, to just disperse the system, right? And you will find out that the age of the system is much higher than that. So it means that if the edge is much higher, then it is most probably in equilibrium. Otherwise, this velocity field, or whatever the line of sight velocity you are observing, it will actually tear apart the system and kind of dismantle it. Yeah, but I will come to this point again.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so so the take-home message from this part is this, that this formalism or technique can be used to unmask the population of dark galaxies from the pool of compact or ultra compact high velocity clouds, which will basically assist in solving the long-lived missing satellite problems. Okay, so to do that, we have a sample of like 59 ultra compact high velocity clouds from Adams et al. So we plan to chase these guys and apply our formalism to investigate which are the potential candidates. Okay, and then later on, with these potential candidate will be observed with optical telescopes to find out what you call in stars in them. So this is basically the the next step what should be taken. All right, so now I will change a gear and go to the last part of my talk, which is related to vertical structure of the baryonic disk in galaxies, right? So, so why the vertical structure is important? Okay, so vertical structure of the galaxies, specifically the baryonic disk, is important in many aspects. First of all, it is actually tells you about the stability of the disk, whether the disk will be stable under perturbation or not. It will also decide the effectiveness of stellar feedback in making supercells or chimneys, and that in turn decides that how much the enriched gas, metal enriched gas, will leak into IgM or CGM. This is also helpful in probing fundamental physics like modified Newtonian dynamics. And also, this is crucial in estimating thick disk molecular gas fraction, which is quite an important aspect, astrophysical aspect. I will discuss more about this in coming slides. Okay, so molecular disks are particularly important because, as I said, molecular gas is the primary fuel for star formation. It also accounts half of the ISM in galaxies, right? In spiral galaxies specifically. And it largely regulates galaxy evolution process because the molecular gas converts the gas into stars, right? And that is why the spirals and dwarf galaxies evolve differently, because they have different amount of molecular and different amount of molecular gas in them, right? So in all these respects, it is then very important to know that how this molecular gas is actually distributed in the galaxy, right? The 3D distribution of the molecular gas, to understand the star formation process and related physics in spiral galaxies. Okay, so fine, the vertical structure, that is the vertical density distribution, is important, but can we measure it directly through observation? So it is hard, because if you take a external galaxy, so the line of sight integration effect is actually the bottleneck, which will not let you measure this density distribution directly. For example, if you take a galaxy like this, okay, this Edge-on galaxy, even if you take an Edge-on galaxy and you want to look at this region, try to find out what is the density distribution in the vertical direction. So this line of sight actually corresponds to a line of sight in the galaxy like this, right? So this from center to this, and this is like, it will go through like this. So it actually covers all sorts of radius, right? From here it is minimum, here it is maximum. So the density distribution you will get by observing this patch is sum of all the density distribution coming from all sorts of radius. So with this, it is very hard to deblend it and find out a density distribution in the vertical direction, right? So for external galaxies, it's not possible, but it is possible for one galaxies, for the Milky Way. Because we are sitting inside the Milky Way, we can look at different directions and we can measure the density distribution, and we can put it into a 3D grid and calculate the vertical density distribution as a function of radius, right? So people have done that, and this is kind of like what they have got. So this is basically the scale height of the molecular disk as a function of radius in the inner galaxy, that is less than 10 kPa. And this scale height, by scale height I mean this is an indicator of how thick is your molecular disk. Okay, so this is basically half width at half maxima of the density distribution in the vertical direction. So this is kind of a measure that how thick is your disk. So in the inner galaxy, what people have found is that it varies between something like 20 parsec to 80 parsec. Okay, and in the outer galaxy, what they have found, it varies between like 100 parsec to kind of 200 parsec. So this is the molecular gas. And at the same time, what they have also found is that the H1, that is the neutral gas, okay, that has a significantly higher scale height, and which makes sense because the molecular gas is the dynamically cold component, right? It has much lower temperature as compared to neutral hydrogen, right? So it is supposed to be like very concise to very close to the mid plane and have like less lower thickness. Okay, so far so good. So this is the classical picture what people have proposed, that the molecular disk is basically thin. Its thickness varies between like 20 to 200 parsec in the galaxy, and the H1 thickness of the H1 disk is high, and they are dynamically decoupled. It means they don't interfere in each other's business in terms of dynamics, right? However, the recent studies indicate otherwise. Okay, what it is? So for example, Waterloo in 1990, so what they have observed in the outer radius in the galaxy, our own Milky Way, these are sensitive observation, and they have found the molecular gas have almost the same scale height as like H1 gas. So it means that the molecular gas goes as high as like the atomic gas. So this is quite surprising because you won't expect, because this is a colder system, right? And later, Garcia Burillo also found, they found molecular gas in NGC 891 at a height of like 1 to 1.4 kiloparsecs from the midplane. So this is quite high. We are talking about like few hundreds of parsecs, and from there you are detecting molecular gas in NGC 891 at as far as like 1.5 kiloparsec from the center, from the midplane. Okay, so which is quite puzzling. So really people don't know like what's going on. So again, like to investigate like how far this molecular gas can go, so we need to measure the 3D distribution, right? As we said that for external galaxy we cannot measure it directly, so we can actually theoretically model. Okay, so that we have done. So to model theoretically, we have taken, we have simplified the system, the galactic disk like this. It's a cartoon picture. And in the vertical direction, what we say that the pressure is being supported by the gravity, and the system is in hydrostatic equilibrium. Okay, and if we do that, we will be able to write down the Poisson's equation of hydrostatic equilibrium for a multi-component system, and then we will be able to numerically solve it. Okay, so I have solved this equation numerically using 8th order Runge-Kutta method, and using the initial conditions coming from observation. Okay, and once you do that, so this is I have done it for like this galaxy NGC 7331, and this is how the solutions look like. Okay, so this is the solution of the equation at r is equal to 6 kiloparsecs at some radius, right? So this is the density distribution of stars, this is the density distribution of molecular gas, and this is the density distribution of atomic gas. Now you can solve this equation at every radius, right? So if you solve that, the solution will give the density distribution in the vertical direction at every radius. So effectively, you have all the information to build a three-dimensional model, right? So which we do. So using this density and the rotation curve, we build a 3D dynamical model of the galaxy, the molecular disk, and then we incline this molecular disk to the observed inclination and project it into the sky plane, right? And then convolve with the telescope beam. So this will basically produce an exact equivalent of your observation, and you already have an observation with you, right? So this is basically for NGC 7331, the model molecular disk, right? And we compare it with observation. So this background is basically observation, and the contours are observation. Okay, so this looks pretty fine, but let's go into more details and take vertical profile at these four distances like 2, 3, 4, and 5 kiloparsecs, and compare the profiles. So if we compare the profiles, you see this red and the black, they are basically the observed one, and the blue are the modeled one. Okay, so as you can see, they actually pretty much matches with the observation, our modeling. So coming back to Sadiq, your question. So this assumption, the vertical hydrostatic equilibrium, whether it is a valid assumption or not, it actually supported by observation. Okay.
Sorry, is this the same galaxy or is this
No,
another galaxy?
it is not the same galaxy. It's a different galaxy. But I'm trying to make a point is that it's not only one observation which you rely on. There are actually observational inputs which do support this assumption.
Okay, fine, thanks.
Okay, so now we coming back to the our question, that the gas we found that is then far up from the mid plane, whether that is possible or not. So now, because we have this three-dimensional distribution, now we can actually check whether this can produce this observation where people found, like, gas from like 1 to 1.5 kiloparsec above the mid plane, right? So what we did is that we incline this galaxy like edge on and image, you build a model image, and here we show the model image, and here we actually show the vertical HWHM profile, the vertical scale height profile. And this actually can explain the gas at like 1 to 1.5 kpc from the mid plane. So this is only like, this is like 500 parsec, but this is only half of the thing, right? Half width at half maxima. So there is actually gas beyond this point. So this can easily produce like 1 to 1.5 kiloparsec. I mean, it can easily produce the emission of molecular gas at a larger distance. So there is no problem in that. So is this only true for one galaxy, or it is true for other galaxies too? So we have done in a more comprehensive way. We have done this exercise in 8 other galaxies, okay, and done the same exercise, and our conclusions are actually the same. So basically, for all these galaxies, producing producing a disk which actually the same, which maintains the molecular gas at a height 1 to 2 kiloparsec is not a problem. Okay, so we conclude that a thick molecular disk which have been observed observationally, what people have found earlier, originates naturally under the assumption of simple hydrostatic equilibrium. We really don't need to much worry about it. But is this the whole picture? This is not the whole picture. There is more to the picture. Okay, so in the consecutive observations, okay, what people do is that people also looked at the spectral feature of the molecular disk. Okay, so now till now we have been talking about the distribution of the gas in the galaxy, right? We did not talk about the spectral feature. So people have observed spectral feature. So they have observed the individual galaxy, and then they compared the spectra of molecular gas and the spectra of atomic neutral hydrogen gas. Okay, and they have found very curious thing. One is that higher the SNR, the lower the width of the molecular spectra. So it means if you move to the brighter region, the sigma CO, that is the velocity dispersion of the spectral width of the molecular gas, it actually decreases, right? And the sigma H1, that is the velocity dispersion of the atomic gas divided by the velocity dispersion of the molecular gas, is 1.4. It means it says that the velocity dispersion of the atomic gas is higher, which makes sense because atomic gas is not that much cold. It is, it is at higher temperature, and molecular gas it is at lower temperature. So you would expect this ratio sigma H1 by sigma CO to be more than 1, right? So there is no surprise in here, but the surprise comes later. So this study people have done like individual region, like you have a galaxy, you look at individual region here, you look at individual region here. But later what people have done is that this Caldu Primo et al, they looked at the galaxy as a whole. So they do not look into the individual region, rather they stacked the spectra from individual region into one. Means they have picked up spectra from all the regions and added them, co-added them, right? Once you do that, then this velocity dispersion of the molecular gas comes out to be exactly equal to the velocity dispersion of the atomic gas, right? So when you are looking at individual region, your molecular gas, the width of the molecular gas is lower. But when you're looking at the galaxy as a whole, the velocity dispersion, the dispersion which is a measure of kinetic temperature of the gas, they are same as the hydrogen and molecular gas. So this is very puzzling. And then they proposed a 2-component molecular disk. So they say that, okay, the molecular disk has two components, one is thin and then another is thick. So the thin component is basically bright, okay, and it has a velocity dispersion, low velocity dispersion. It is cold and it is very thin, concentrated around the mid plane, right? And then there is a thick component which is more diffuse, but they are not as bright, okay, they are very diffuse and they are not bright, and they have high velocity dispersion. They go very higher up in the from the mid plane. So when you are looking at individual region, your individual spectra, so you are only looking at the thin disk because that is the bright component. The contribution from the thick disk is very less, okay. If because this is very less, you don't see them. So the spectral width of the thick component actually not being incorporated because the contribution is so less. But when you actually co-add all the spectra over the whole galaxy, then this contribution actually comes up, and they are the dominating contributor, okay. So that is why the width you see this actually enlarged, because you now have started seeing this thick component, right? So if this is the story, like the galaxy disk has like two components, thin and thick, then there are several fundamental questions comes, okay. So first of all, that how do we test, I mean, whether it is two component or one component, is there any way? What are the origin? So how does this thick components actually originates, and how do they survive at this large height? Because if you are saying that this thick component is like high velocity dispersion, so it will basically will be a puffed up disk and it will go much further in the height. So at that height, how do you maintain this gas, molecular gas, right? And what is the fractional abundance? Like how much gas is basically in the thick disk? 30%, 40%, 50%, how much, right? So we build a model of molecular disk, considering like thin and thin disk, and try to simulate the observational signature, okay. That if it is a thin disk, then you only thin disk, then you would expect like this kind of observational signature. And if it has like two component, then you would expect this kind of observational signature. So in particular, we studied two like signatures. One is column density map and the spectral cube. So in column density map, so this is where I simulated like, for NGC 7331, one component disk and two component disk. And the left and right side, it feels like very similar. And if we go into more details, like, if you take the vertical cut, they exactly, the same. So the surface density, so if you just look at the, surface density distribution, from here, it is very difficult to say that whether this, this galaxy has like one component disk or two component disk, right? Okay, is it possible to detect in spectral signature? Yes, it is possible to detect in spectral signature. So what we have found is that if the galaxy has like two component molecular disk, then the spectra of the stacked spectra of the molecular disk will be best fitted by a double Gaussian, right? If it has like it has two component molecular disk. But if it is like has only one component, you would expect to fit with a single Gaussian. And do we see in observation? Yes, we do see it in observation. So this is for NGC 6946. These black crosses are basically the observed points. This is all, observation points. And this red curve is a single Gaussian fit to the spectra, and the blue is a double Gaussian fit to the spectra. As you can see, the blue curve is actually, explain the data better as compared to a single Gaussian fit. So for at least NGC 6946, we can say its molecular disk is has two components. And this kind of study is actually for the first time we have done. Okay, so now next what? So fine, this NGC 6946 has two component molecular disk, but what is the fraction of gas in these two components? Whether like 50% is in the thick disk or thick and thin disk, or like 70% is in the thick disk and 30% is in the thin disk. So to do that, to do that study, what we have done is that so we have again like simulated molecular disk with different fraction. And if we change the fraction, as you can see in the left panel, the thickness, that is the spectral width, that actually changes. So in this figure, what I'm showing is that the red curve, the red points are basically the spectra of a molecular disk where thin and the thick disk are in equal proportion, 50-50, right? And in the blue curve shows that where the thick disk is 70% and thin disk is 30%, right? And as you can see, the spectral widths are actually different. And that is because, like, the thin disk is intrinsically having a velocity dispersion or width of like 7 km/s, and thick disk already has a velocity dispersion like 12 km/s, is higher. So if you like mix, in different proportion, so the final spectra you will get will have different spectral width, and this is a measurable quantity. Okay, the spectral width, you can measure it from observation, and you can actually compare with the observation to find out that what is the proportion of the gas which explains the observation better, right? So this is what we have done. So we have simulated many disks, many two-component disks for NGC 6946 with different thick disk proportions, like starting from here, like 95% to 90%, then 50%, like that. And for each thick disk proportion, this gas proportions, we generate the spectral width profiles as we will be observing with the telescope, and we already have the observation with the telescope, right? So these red points are basically the observation, and we find what is the best match or best thick disk gas fraction at every radius which match the data best. And what we have found is that the thick disk gas fraction is actually varies from about 60% to about 80% as a function of radius. And this is the first kind of study where we have determined this thick disk gas fraction in a resolved manner. Okay, so what are the main important findings of this result is the following. So you see the 70%, almost 70% of the gas is in thick disk. What is thick disk? Thick disk is basically the gas which is like diffuse, it has like high velocity dispersion, and it do not have like it's not high density gas, right? So if I'm finding that 70% of the gas in the molecular disk is in this form, so this gas is not supposed to not supposed to participate in star formation, because they are very low density, they are like much more diffuse, they are not compact, and they are much higher up this thing. So it means only 30% of the gas is in thin disk, and they are participating in star formation. So the star formation laws, what we have like done till now, the Kenniket-Smith law and all, we have always taken the total molecular gas. We have never thought of like there could be a part of the molecular gas which is like very diffuse and will not take part in the star formation. So the star formation recipes need to be calibrated, right? That is one. The second thing is that the origin of this thick disk, right? So what we have found here is that the thick disk fraction is almost constant as a function of radius, right? So now some of the studies say that this thick disk actually came later. The first is that thin disk was there, then you have formed stars. This star formation injected energy, and it has actually created this low density gas, and it has actually thrown out the gas which are like loitering around as thick disk gas. But if that is true, then you would expect that at the central region, the close to the center, the star formation activity is more. So there you would expect that the more star formation will actually produce more thick disk fraction, right? Because it will kind of throw more gas out. And as you go out, you would expect less and less thick disk gas fraction, but which we do not see. So here we are proposing, so this is just a proposition, it needs more investigation, that probably the thick disk actually came first, okay, by some global mechanism, we do not know yet, okay, and then over the time they have coagulated or follow the potential and coagulated as a thin disk in the center, right? So in that sense, the fraction would be like more homogenized as compared to the other one, but this is still a proposition, and we need to do this study for more of the galaxies to understand it better or clear, right? Okay, so this is still ongoing work, and we have done it for NGC 6946, and we are actually working on these other 8 galaxy sample we have. And we will be finding out this thick disk molecular gas fraction, and also how it will basically change the understanding of Kenniket-Smith law in galaxies, specifically spiral galaxies. Okay, so with this, here is the summary of this part. So we developed a formalism to estimate the 3D distribution of gas in galaxies based on hydrostatic equilibrium assumption. We find that a thick molecular disk arises naturally under the assumption of simple hydrostatic equilibrium. One needs not to worry about how this gas came about from 1.5 kiloparsec from the midplane. The spectral signature is consistent at least for NGC 6946 with a thin plus thick molecular disk in galaxies, NGC 6946. And we estimated for the first time the thick disk molecular gas fraction in NGC 6946 and found it to be around 70%, which is constant as a function of radius. And this has a large implication in understanding star formation recipe in galaxies, specifically in spiral galaxies. So with this, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Naren. Questions, comments? Actually, ask.
Asking questions.
You can either raise hand or just.
Okay, maybe I can.
Okay, Dorka.
All right,
Yeah.
Okay, Naren, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Dorka.
Okay, well, I guess your presentation had two parts. The first part you talked about dwarf galaxies and their possible evolutionary connection to the damped Lyman alpha absorbers at higher redshifts.
Right.
The second was about distribution of molecular gas in spiral galaxies.
Right.
So these are sort of two separate, different topics.
Right.
Right. So maybe why don't let me just ask some questions that came to my mind related to the molecular gas distribution in spiral galaxies.
Right.
Now, by now, of course, with things like ALMA and so on working for decades,
correct.
Do we have some idea as to how common it is to find two components of molecular gas distribution in the spiral galaxies? Is it just some one or two peculiar galaxies, or is this something that you find in most of them observationally?
Yeah. Okay. No, this is Dwarka. This is actually more common. I mean, people have started realizing is day by day. Earlier, because this spectral observation was not so much prevalent. Yes, ALMA is changing, playing a big role. Say, for example, if I show you here, this is M51, and with IRAM, and this is Plateau-Debord observatory observation. So here also they have found, in M51, there are these two component molecular disk. Okay. So if you observe with single disk, you picked up the amount of flux, which is much more. And if you observe with an interferometer, you pick up much less flux. And also this is again kind of consistent with the proposition that the in interferometer you see these knots and this very high density region, which is like part of this thin disk. And if you do the spectral studies, you will see the spectral width is actually around 7 km per second. And here with the iron 30 meter, which is like a larger beam, there also you get large amount of flux, and also the spectral width is also consistent with the proposition of two component study. So this is not just one galaxies, I believe. I mean, not just one galaxies. There are actually more galaxies which have confirmed that they have two component disk. But this study of what is the fraction of galaxies, what is the fractional amount, that is a bit tough. It needs detailed modeling, because from here, from single disk and the interferometric observations, it is very hard to conclude. They have concluded overall, means at global level, they said that more than 50% gas is in thick disk, but you cannot do a resolved measurements over here. So it requires a resolved kind of detailed modeling, which we have done.
Okay, the one example that you showed,
yeah,
to demonstrate thin disk and thick disk,
Yeah.
You showed this profile for which you had fit single Gaussian and double Gaussian.
Right,
And the double Gaussian seemed to fit marginally better than the single one.
right.
Is this the, as far as you are concerned, is this the only evidence you have to claim it's
No, Dwarka. I mean, this is kind of more, I would say, supporting evidence. It is true that this is only this fitting will not be good enough. But again, this spectra, Dwarka, this is a stacked spectra. Okay, this is not a spectra of individual region, right? So this has a significant amount of SNR. I have normalized it for fitting purpose, but the SNR of this spectra is quite significant. But still, I would say this is a supporting evidence. I would more rely on this kind of observation to make the statement that there are two component disk.
Yeah, but remember, can you go back to that spectrum you showed?
Yes.
Yeah. See the spectral profile.
Correct.
If you look at -50 or +70,
Right.
you see the ringing there.
Yeah. I agree.
I mean,
yeah.
So that is obviously to do with the
Yes. So these are basically hierarchical observation, and the beam is a bit large for
No,
this.
suppose for the moment I ignore those ripples.
Correct.
If you look at the rest of the profile, can you make a distinction between single and double?
Yeah, so it is difficult, but I will only focus on this region, Dorga. You see this region.
I know, that's what worries me.
Yeah.
The reason I'm pushing for this is, the reason I'm it is a significant statement to make.
Right.
Whether it is one broad Gaussian or two Gaussians.
Correct.
See, that's a big difference.
Right.
Philosophically, that is why I'm trying to push you to tell me what you think, what you will believe, actually believe, given the data.
So, Dwarka, can I just amplify this particular point, because this was exactly the graph I was coming to. See, a double Gaussian will mean that you basically have two distributions or some combination of two distributions to fit.
Right.
The fit with a double Gaussian will be better because you have one more parameter to fit with.
Correct.
Okay, that is just obvious. It doesn't even have to be a double Gaussian. You just have one more free parameter to fit with. And that will make all the difference between the quality of the fit. So my question is, what are the error bars on the velocity observation that you have quoted? Because if the size of the ripples, this is what Dwarka is saying, if the size of the ripples and if the baseline corrections are more than what is this, I cannot understand why this can be in support of double Gaussian versus two distributions versus single distribution.
Okay. So for this particular data, I would agree with Dwarka, is that this is quite old. I mean, it's not with ALMA data. This is with IRAM telescope. It is not as sensitive as you would expect. I mean, as the data is coming these days. Okay, this is quite old data. And for that, this I will not place as the supporting evidence of two component molecular disk. What I only commenting is that we have done the theoretical studies, and this is what we are observing, is that if you have two component, you would expect a two component Gaussian to fit best. Now coming to Sadiq, your point, yes, the double Gaussian have extra parameter, it will fit better, but I am asking question in the other way. I am asking whether single Gaussian is good enough to fit the data or not.
What are the values of reduced chi-squared for the two fits?
Okay, so that I am not sure. I have to, I mean, I don't remember it right now. I don't have put this thing. But again, so I mean, this plot I am not kind of telling to demonstrate that NGC 6946.
Okay, do you have an example of do you have a best example with you to show two Gaussians? All right, let's ignore this.
Okay.
Do you have a better example?
Oh, I don't have actually. I did not work out for other galaxies yet.
No, no, but are there profiles?
Huh.
See, not at the, well, are there profiles which you know
Right.
where you have to have two Gaussians, otherwise the residual left is, see, in fact, what would be nice to demonstrate this profile,
Right.
you fit a single Gaussian, show me the residual. Are they
Yes.
beyond the
Yeah.
noise and the systematics in the spectrum? That is something which you have shown.
Right. Right. That
Is
that
it-
I yeah
Has
that
it
I
been done?
yeah, that I had done actually. I had not put it here, and you have. I mean, you can see there is a residual which is good enough to. I mean, which is actually higher than the this thing. But right now I don't have this thing. I have to pull it up. But I agree with you that more sensitive observation will actually do it better. And I mean, this is only one supporting evidence. That's what I'm emphasizing.
What
Because
else?
there are-
Evidence, what other evidence is there?
So for example, this like this single disk and interferometric observation, this clearly demonstrate that you do have two component molecularities. This is another one. The other one is this studies, right? These guys here, this thing, that if you stack the spectra in a larger sample of galaxies, this sigma h1 by sigma c actually goes to 1.0. So if you just consider, sorry,
When you-
one,
When you take the spectra at different distances and stack them,
right?
are we clear that no systematic motion is blending into this?
No. So the resolution is good
It's
enough,
only
and
dispersion. You're calling it sigma.
this is dispersion. This is dispersion. No. So there is no blending, Dwarka, because these systems are carefully chosen to be very much face on. So they have rejected any galaxies with more than 50-degree inclination, and also the resolution of the data is good enough that you don't have much blending in the spectra. And this is kind of beyond doubt, in a sense. It has been done in a comprehensive sample. So, I mean, these results, I mean, I'm not saying that is the only one, I mean, only sole evidence of two component molecularities. There are other evidences too.
Any other questions, Dorka?
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me just a couple of other things that I had. You
Right.
showed this. You gave the example of NGC 891,
Right.
and you had some. You said there's a molecular gas found 1.4 kpc above the disk.
Right.
Is it clear that that molecular gas is actually related to this galaxy? Is it rotating? Is there a rotation observed to the galaxy?
Okay. So that is actually very difficult to measure, Dorka. That is because first of all, the beam is quite large, and you do not have enough sensitivity to measure the rotation in the molecular disk at this height. But there has been other measurements using H alpha, which actually represents hot dust. Okay. So there they have shown that it is consistent with a rotation, and that is a damped rotation. So it is consistent with that is a part of the galaxy. It's not something coming out like that.
Okay. And then you talked about this molecular gas distribution in the Milky Way.
Right.
Now, as you know, one of the biggest problems with the
Yes.
Milky Way is
Distance.
how do you assign a distance?
Right.
How has that been taken into account here, particularly for those which are within the solar circle?
Yeah. So most of the time, I mean, you are right. Actually, this is one of the problems. So, but most of the these measurements have assigned distance from velocity measurements. Fitting
But
with the
velocity measurements, unless there is an independent distance,
right.
the velocity will give you two distances within
Right.
the solar circle.
Correct. That is true.
Okay.
Yeah, that is true. But there is a significant uncertainty. I mean, I agree with you. Okay, but these are like quite indicative also, because this observation. I mean. So this observation has actually a bit higher sensitivity, because it is using this IRIS point source measurement, which they have a multi wavelength measurement of this IRIS sources. So it has a better estimate of distances. But again, there also a significant uncertainty is there.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, in fact, I will believe your external galaxy measurements
Right.
more than the Milky Way measurements.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
here it's crazy. You don't know the distance, near distance,
Right.
far distance. So it's a bit, it's tricky to rely on such things for the Milky Way. But
Yeah.
I have some questions, but you go ahead.
yeah.
Siddharth.
Okay. Now you said that if this thin disk and thick disk is true.
Correct.
By the way, personally, I'm not convinced that it is.
No, Dwarka, it is true. Tell me.
No.
All right.
I need to see a bit more data on this.
Okay, fine.
Maybe it is there. But suppose it is true. What you're suggesting is that the thick disk actually formed from outside, and the colder part of it, which condenses, has formed a thin disk. Yeah.
Yeah, that is kind of a proposition, you can say.
So how do you keep this molecular gas at that distance from all the various radiation and various losses?
Yeah, that's
How does one do that?
Yeah, so that's an excellent point actually. So we really don't understand fully, I mean, how that can come about. But you know, Dwarka, there has been detection of dust, okay, dust emission.
Naren, your mic.
Can't hear you.
Hello?
We can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
No, suddenly your voice dropped.
Hello, now?
Yeah.
Yes, better.
This is doing something funny, okay. Okay, Dwarka, yes, it is true that we really don't know yet. I mean, there are, there needs more observation. But I can tell you there has been detection of dust in galaxies at a significant height. Okay, so specifically H alpha continuum emission, people have found that there are significant amount of dust, and the way I see it is that it is probably a continuous transformation between H1 and molecular gas in pockets. Okay, so because you see these two components, this thick disk molecular gas and the H1, they are actually dynamically, they are also form the same dynamical component. It means they have the same scale height, they go to same height, they are rotating in a very similar way. So I mean, until and unless they are kind of very closely correlated, it's very difficult, right? And you are seeing this, this sigma H1 by sigma CO is equal to 1, not only one galaxies, many galaxies, and also as a function of radius. So, and that only can happen if these two are like interchanging with each other. So my proposition would be like, this is not a very kind of as you can say that it's a molecular gas and sitting there forever. It is probably a continuous spontaneous phase transition is happening in pockets, and there are evidence of dust at large heights. But again, I mean, I would agree with you that this needs more detailed observation and maybe more theoretical work also.
Can I ask a couple of questions about the dwarf galaxies?
Yes, please.
Now, you said FIGS2 had a much larger sample compared to FIGS.
No. So, I mean, I didn't say that, but the FIGS2, FIGS1 has like around 66 galaxies. FIGS2 we observed like 20, but detected 15. Together, FIGS and FIGS2 comprises around 100 galaxy now, because there are observations after that which also happened, like after me, Susma and company. Yes. All
right. One of the questions that one of the issues that you mentioned in this context was the so-called missing satellite problem.
Right.
You don't find as many satellite galaxies around the Milky Way as you would expect from some theory, some model.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, why doesn't one simply say that, look, this is just due to the fact that the galaxy formation is actually inefficient and you're just left with little clouds and you don't have too many of these galaxies hanging around? What is wrong with that?
No, I mean, it's I mean, this is one of the kind of way you can say that, yes, I mean, it is inefficient. Obviously, the numerical simulations, okay, the n-body simulations, they actually gives you that, okay, this many halos you would expect, right? And now if you say that, okay, I am not efficient enough to accumulate baryons in it to form a galaxy for that matter, okay, and okay, I don't see them. This is one proposition. Actually, people, theoretical people, do have I mean, do have this solution, and they say, but to do that, some you have the halo and it is inefficient, it is not accumulating enough baryons. So to satisfy that, you need to invoke some sort of, like, feedback mechanisms, energy injection, or you have to ionize, UV evaporate the whole baryons. So that is another channel to address the problem. But yes, it has also its challenges. For example, like, how do you just simply evaporate all the baryons from a dark matter halo? And the similar dark matter halos do show the galaxies, I mean, do form galaxies, right? So you have some number of galaxies which has dark matter halo, which is very similar what is predicted by by the lambda CDM. And now you are saying that, okay, some halos it will form and some halos it will not form. So then there would be a preferential preferential application of feedback mechanisms, which will work at some set of halos and which will not work at some other set of so it's messy. I am not actually expert in this direction, but the way I understand is that people are still working in this, and this is one of the route what people are trying to explore numerically.
Okay, so maybe last question, I don't want to go on. Do you
Yeah.
think the dwarf galaxies in the local volume are local analogs of high redshift damped Lyman alpha absorbers?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't. I mean, from our this thing also, we have seen that, at DLA column density, they only produce kind of 10% of the cross section. And if you go, for example, beyond 21 point, just a minute. Yeah. So if you go, like, beyond like 21, 10 to the power 21 column density, this drops very significantly. So, so this is one of the things which actually we discussed in the paper in details, is that dwarf galaxies are kind of puffy system, right? So it's very difficult to generate like high column density out of them. Like if you just orient them like this, like that, they're like ball of gas, so you won't get high column density absorbers, right? On the other hand, if you have like spiral galaxy, if you orient them in edge on, so they can really generate high column density, right? So so you need some systems, some big systems which are at edge on, or nearly edge on case, they are producing this high column density absorbers. These dwarfs will not be otherwise. One possibility is that the dwarfs at high redshifts are very different than dwarfs at low redshift. It's completely different. They are not analogs at all. I mean, that only can kind of
Okay,
Thanks.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to go over the slide of Leo T,
Yes, yes.
where you were showing and I wanted to ask you something.
Yeah.
Can you suppose in the first moment map,
Right.
would you be able to, what sort of velocities do you see?
Okay, so
Something order of 30, 35 kilometer per second. Is that the color palette? If I can, am I reading
yeah,
it?
Yeah, it is like,
Is it kilometer per second?
Yeah, like roughly 30 to 35, but the overall, so this is only just this region, but most of the galaxy is like between 5 to 20, 25, it's like that.
5 to 25. Okay. So I mean, like actually, so this is in connection with what Sadiq asked.
Right.
I mean, if it were not in hydrostatic equilibrium,
Correct.
right,
Right.
then there will be a dynamical scale. I mean, it will evolve in a dynamical scale under self-gravity.
Right.
And you can estimate the dynamical time scale and the speed with which it is going to collapse on itself. And that you can, I've estimated while you were talking, it's of the order of kilometer per second, which you don't see.
Right.
Which is why you can say that it is in hydrostatic equilibrium.
Okay. Yeah.
Something
That's
is holding it up against its gravity.
correct. Correct.
Sorry, Biman, can you just, I will come back to you for this explanation, okay?
No, I'm just saying that, if it were not in hydrostatic equilibrium, then it would just collapse under its self-gravity. Then there will be some time scale, and then there will be some velocity involved, speed involved of its collapse, which is of the
Yeah.
order of 50 kilometers per second, given this mass and radius that he has just given. I've just
I see.
given that. It's just a function of mass
Yeah,
and the radius,
Yeah.
and which you
3.5.
don't see. So it means that then something is holding it up.
Okay.
The pressure. And the
Okay.
pressure can come
Yeah,
from
yeah,
the
fine.
temperature or from turbulence or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is the justification, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's nice to have the,
Yeah.
yeah, thanks.
And the other question that you had asked about why does one believe in the bottom-up scenario where the small galaxies merge? Shiv will be able to give a better answer. I think it depends on the power spectrum of the fluctuations. Is that right, Shiv? Are you around? Okay. Yeah, so it's something to do with the cosmological observations tell us that the power spectrum of fluctuation was such that we believe in this scenario of small galaxies to have formed first, and then the large galaxies form.
Right.
But actually, if you think about it, see,
Hmm.
is the primordial stars, okay,
Hmm.
are supposed to be the largest stars, right?
Right.
And
Okay.
then they have shrunk in size as the universe has evolved. So I mean, it's like, and that's a very real argument. Okay.
Yeah, formation of stars is a bit slightly.
So the question is,
Very
where
complicated.
is there a break? See, the thing is that obviously then there is some big fracture in the, in how you deal with the small scale stuff versus the medium and large scale stuff. And I mean, it's just not, that was basically the question.
Right. I mean, so one can have in principle top-down scenario where you have large galaxies, large objects, which would break it down into small objects. And that has been proved wrong, just cosmological observations.
Yeah.
That model doesn't fit all the observations, for example. Yeah.
And one more point is that Sadiq, this is we are talking about when we talk about galaxy formation, it's mostly dark matter halo we are talking about. So they only the growth of the structures happens only gravitationally. It's like stellar physics a little bit. I mean, there are baronic physics is involved. But as Biman said that the power spectrum of the fluctuation will decide how this will grow. I mean the over densities will grow over the
Yeah,
time
okay.
and from galaxies. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Any other questions, comments?
So I have just one question actually.
Yeah.
So you have gone through 3 sets of physics, right, in this talk. Now, obviously, everything is based on observations, and you spent a lot of time doing the modeling,
Right.
and trying to understand the system, which is excellent. But the question I have is, are any of these observations your observations or observations you have been involved with?
Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, so I mean, first kind of these dwarf galaxy observations I have been involved with, and all these things are actually our observations, this first part. And I have not actually presented many of the stuff over here, which like I have been involved with observing with the GMRT. Like neutral hydrogen in dark matter deficient galaxies, and absorption line to for detecting neutral hydrogen in our galaxy. So roughly you can say that whatever I have present or whatever I have worked, I mean around like 50% of them are actually observation. The whole
Okay.
bulk of the observation, 50% is like I have done observation.
Okay, and this is all in radio.
This is all in radio, but I have used data from other bands, and that you need processing. I mean, like you
Correct.
need to analyze the data and so on. Yeah.
But do you actually also observe in other bands?
I did not observe in other band apart from UV.
Okay.
for star formation and H alpha to some extent, but not in that. depth.
Okay, fine. Just wanted to know,
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm done.
If there are no more questions, then let's thank Naren.
Thank you.
And yeah. Thank you all for attending.
Thanks.
So I will end now, and I think, how do I get this recording thing? Stop recording.